Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today's video dives into terrifying discoveries made in places you'd never suspect. Get ready for chilling stories that prove safety can be an illusion. Let's begin and uncover the secrets lurking in the shadows. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the suburban street washed and gleaming under the cold light of the street lamps. Samantha Harper stood at her kitchen window, her fingers curled loosely around a mug of chamomile tea, watching the last drops slide down the glass. It was a quiet Thursday night in Brookfield Heights, the kind of quiet that made the neighborhood feel like a sealed snow globe, safe, calm, predictable. Samantha's house, like every other one on Birch Hollow Lane, was a neatly maintained two-story with a trimmed lawn and pale blue shutters. The only sound was the gentle hum of her refrigerator. Her 12-year-old daughter, Chloe, was upstairs, reading before bed. Samantha's husband, Greg, was working the late shift at the hospital. It should have been an entirely uneventful night, but her eyes kept drifting to the small storage shed at the far corner of their backyard. It wasn't unusual to glance at it. It was where Greg kept the lawn mower, the rake, and the kids' old bikes. But tonight, something about it felt different. She couldn't quite name why. Maybe it was the way the shadows pooled unnaturally at its base, or the faint creak she thought she'd heard earlier when the wind had died down. She shook it off, took another sip of tea, and told herself she was being ridiculous. The shed had been there since they moved in 5 years ago. It came with the house, already stocked with the usual odds and ends. They'd never had any reason to think about it much, beyond the occasional spider web that had to be swept out. But now, staring at it under the dim security light, she noticed the padlock on the door was hanging open. Her heart gave a strange little lurch. It had been locked earlier, she was sure of it. Greg was meticulous about things like that, and Chloe never went near the shed. She set her tea down and leaned closer to the window, frowning. Maybe Greg had left it unlocked by accident before heading to work. Or maybe she didn't finish the thought. Samantha crossed the kitchen, unlocked the sliding door, and stepped barefoot onto the deck. The air was cool and damp, smelling faintly of wet earth and grass. Her toes curled against the boards as she descended the steps, her eyes fixed on the dark outline of the shed. The neighborhood seemed unnervingly still now, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Even the crickets were silent. As she reached the shed, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. There was no sign of forced entry. The padlock was old but sturdy, its shackle swinging slightly in the faint breeze. She pushed the door open slowly, the hinges giving a soft groan. Inside, the shed smelled of oil, wood, and dampness. Moonlight spilled through a small crack in the roof, painting a thin silver line across the floor. Everything seemed in place at first glance. The rake leaning against the wall, the lawn mower in the corner, the dusty shelves with paint cans and gardening tools. But then she noticed something she was certain hadn't been there before. In the center of the floor was a square of plywood, roughly 2 feet by 2 feet, with a heavy iron ring bolted into it. She blinked. No, this wasn't possible. They'd been in this shed dozens of times. There had never been a trapdoor. She crouched, her breath coming a little quicker now, and touched the wood. It was newer than the rest of the shed floor, the grain still sharp, the nails shiny. "Chloe?" she called out, her voice louder than she meant it to be. No answer, just the faint ticking of rainwater dripping from the roof. Samantha gripped the iron ring and pulled. The panel came up surprisingly easily, revealing a square shaft that descended into complete darkness. A damp, earthy smell drifted up from below, mixed with something faintly metallic. A faint sound rose from the darkness. At first she thought it was the wind again, but no. It was too steady, too deliberate. A soft tapping, like knuckles rapping slowly against wood. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to slam the trapdoor shut and run back to the house, call Greg, call the police, call someone. But some terrible curiosity rooted her in place. She leaned forward, squinting into the darkness. "Hello!" The tapping stopped. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then, from somewhere far below, came a voice. It was a whisper, ragged and strained, but she heard it as clearly as if the speaker were right beside her ear. "You shouldn't have opened it." Samantha's breath caught. She dropped the trapdoor, the panel slamming shut with a hollow thud. The shed felt suddenly smaller, the shadows closing in around her. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a coiled garden hose, and bolted for the house. Once inside, she locked the sliding door, drew the curtains, and pressed her back against the wall, her chest heaving. Her mind raced. Had she really heard it? Could she have imagined it? Upstairs, the sound of footsteps made her freeze. "Chloe?" she called again, her voice trembling. No answer. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, crossing from Chloe's room toward the top of the stairs. Then silence. Samantha's phone was on the counter. She grabbed it, fumbling to unlock the screen. Her fingers shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She had just pulled up Greg's number when the front door rattled violently, as though someone outside was testing the knob. Her eyes darted toward the door. The deadbolt was locked, but the noise continued, a steady jolt of metal against wood. Then, without warning, it stopped. The house was silent again. She stood there for what felt like hours, listening, her skin prickling with the sensation of being watched. Finally, she worked up the courage to climb the stairs, one slow step at a time. Chloe's bedroom door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open gently. The bed was empty. Her gaze swept the room, catching on the open window. The curtains billowed softly inward, carrying the scent of wet grass. On the floor, just beneath the window, was a trail of muddy footprints. They were small, about the size of Chloe's feet, except they were bare, and the toes were disturbingly long. The trail led toward the hallway and stopped. Samantha backed away, her stomach twisting. Then she heard it again, the same slow tapping as in the shed, this time coming from somewhere inside the house. The sound was faint at first, like it might be coming from the far end of the hallway. But with each second it grew more distinct, more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm was steady, unhurried, as though whoever or whatever was making it knew she was listening. Samantha's breath came shallow and quick. Every instinct told her to run, to scoop up Chloe and flee the house without looking back. But Chloe was gone. The footprints had ended abruptly in the hall, and there was no sign of her daughter anywhere. Leaving now felt like abandoning her. She gripped the banister with white knuckles and strained her ears. The tapping had moved ever so slightly, closer now, maybe from the first floor. She took one careful step back down, the wooden stair creaking softly under her bare foot. The sound paused. Then, 3 slow taps echoed from directly below her. She froze. The living room lay in shadow, the faint glow from the kitchen clock casting a sickly green hue on the walls. She could see the edge of the couch, the coffee table, the dark outline of the TV. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then she saw it. The sliding glass door she'd locked earlier was open. The curtain swayed gently inward. Her pulse surged. Had someone slipped in while she was upstairs? Or, her mind recoiled at the thought, had something come out of the shed and followed her inside? She swallowed hard, willing herself to step off the last stair. Her phone was still in her hand, and she quickly thumbed 911 into the keypad, ready to hit call. But just before she did, a small, muffled sound came from the kitchen. It was a voice, high-pitched, weak. "Mom!" Her knees nearly gave way. "Chloe?" she whispered. The voice came again, slightly stronger this time. "Mom, I'm in here." She took 2 steps toward the kitchen, her heart caught between relief and dread. If Chloe was here, if she was safe, then what had been moving through the house? And why had she been outside, barefoot, in the rain? When she reached the doorway, she stopped dead. Chloe was standing in the center of the kitchen, her nightgown damp and clinging to her small frame, her bare feet leaving faint wet prints on the tile. Her hair hung in wet strands over her face. She was shivering. "Oh my God, Chloe!" Samantha rushed forward, but stopped halfway across the room. Something wasn't right. Chloe's head tilted slightly to the side, her lips curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Her eyes looked wrong. Not vacant exactly, but as though they were looking through Samantha, focusing on something far beyond her. Something that wasn't in the room at all. "Sweetheart, what happened? Were you outside?" Samantha's voice wavered. Chloe's smile widened a fraction. "I went to see the man." The words sent a sharp jolt down Samantha's spine. "What man?" Chloe's gaze flicked toward the window above the sink. "The one who lives under the shed." Samantha's grip tightened on her phone. "There's no one under the shed, honey. That's just—" "He said you were going to open the door," Chloe interrupted, her tone almost sing-song. "He told me to wait." Every muscle in Samantha's body locked up. "What door?" Chloe blinked slowly, the wet strands of hair shifting slightly against her cheek. "The door in the floor." Her voice was flat now, empty of the playful cadence from a moment ago. Samantha felt her throat go dry. I need you to come with me," Samantha managed. "We're leaving the house right now." But Chloe didn't move. She just kept staring at her mother, the faint smile returning. "He's already inside." Before Samantha could respond, the kitchen light flickered. Once, twice, then it went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. The only sound was the dripping of water from Chloe's hair onto the tile. "Chloe!" Samantha's voice was barely audible. Somewhere in the dark, the tapping started again. This time faster, like impatient fingers drumming on wood. It wasn't coming from the shed anymore. It was coming from directly behind her. She spun, her phone's flashlight snapping on. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the counters, the fridge, the sliding door. Nothing. When she turned back to Chloe, the kitchen was empty. "Chloe!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She lunged forward, aiming the flashlight toward the living room. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, a small, pale figure slipping around the corner toward the stairs. Samantha gave chase, her footsteps pounding on the hardwood. She reached the base of the stairs just in time to see Chloe disappear into the darkened hallway above. Samantha took the steps two at a time, the flashlight shaking wildly in her hand. When she reached the top, the beam caught the edge of Chloe's bedroom door, swinging slowly shut. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was empty again, but on the bed, neatly placed in the center of the pillow, was Chloe's favorite stuffed rabbit. His head was turned toward the window, and on the wall above the bed, written in something dark and glistening, were 3 words: "Don't go down." Samantha's hands trembled as she reached out to touch the writing. It was still wet. Her stomach churned at the metallic smell, blood. The tapping began again, softer now, but closer than ever. It was coming from the floor beneath her feet. She backed away, her eyes darting toward the hallway. If she could get to the front door, to the neighbors, maybe she could. The sound of wood splintering froze her in place. A jagged crack formed in the floorboards by the foot of the bed. Slowly, impossibly, a thin, gray hand emerged from the gap, fingers long and bony, nails black and curling. It gripped the edge of the floor and pulled. Samantha screamed, stumbling backward toward the door. But before she could reach it, the bedroom light flared on. The room was exactly as it had been when she tucked Chloe in hours ago. No cracks in the floor, no writing on the wall, no wet footprints. The stuffed rabbit sat innocently on the bed. Her chest heaved. She blinked hard, shaking her head. "I'm losing it," she whispered to herself. Then she heard it, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. A whisper, curling up from somewhere deep below. "It's not your turn yet." Samantha didn't sleep that night. She sat in the hallway outside Chloe's room, the lamp in her hand flickering every so often as though the bulb was straining against something unseen. She had checked the whole house 3 times. Under the beds, inside the closets, every lock on every door and window, and found nothing out of place. And yet, no matter how much she told herself that the blood on the wall, the hand from the floor, the whispers, were all the products of her imagination, her body wouldn't stop shaking. Chloe had fallen asleep quickly, curled up with her stuffed rabbit, breathing softly. If Samantha hadn't witnessed what she had earlier, she might have believed everything was perfectly normal. But each time Chloe twitched in her sleep, Samantha's nerves spiked, afraid that when her daughter woke, those strange, distant eyes would return. The hours crept by. At some point, the rain started again, tapping gently against the windows, masking the other sounds in the house. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe the rain was hiding beneath something else. Every so often, she swore she heard that tapping beneath it, faint but persistent, like a reminder. By 4:17 a.m., she'd made up her mind. When Greg got home, she was going to tell him everything. About the open shed, the trapdoor, the voice, the footprints, all of it. They'd call the police, get someone to check under the shed. Maybe they'd even leave the house until they knew what was going on. She didn't care if it sounded crazy. She couldn't keep this to herself anymore. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway sent a surge of relief through her. She got to her feet, smoothing her hair and trying to look less frantic than she felt. She wanted Greg to believe her, not think she'd been up all night unraveling over nothing. She moved to the top of the stairs, waiting for the front door to open. But it didn't. The car engine idled for a moment, then shut off. No footsteps, no keys in the lock. Samantha frowned and peered through the upstairs window overlooking the driveway. Greg's car was there, but the driver's seat was empty. Her chest tightened. She went down the stairs slowly, the house feeling colder now, the shadows thicker. She called out, "Greg?" But the sound seemed to vanish into the air, swallowed before it could echo. At the front door, she hesitated. The locks were still engaged. She unlatched them quickly and pulled the door open. The driveway was empty. No car, no wet tire tracks, just the quiet, glistening street under the rain. A cold, crawling sensation spread up her spine. She closed the door, locked it again, and backed away. That's when she noticed it. The faint glow coming from the back of the house. The shed light was on. She hadn't turned it on. She was certain of that. Her breath hitched as she remembered the open padlock, the trapdoor, the whisper. She wanted to turn away, go back upstairs, and wait until sunrise. But the glow was like a hook in her chest, pulling her toward it. She slid open the glass door just enough to step out onto the deck. The rain was falling harder now, soaking her in seconds, but she barely noticed. She descended the steps, her bare feet sinking into the wet grass, her eyes locked on the shed. The padlock dangled from the latch again, open. She reached the door, pushed it open, and was hit by the damp, metallic scent that had seeped from the trapdoor before. The light inside was dim, yellowish, casting long, warped shadows across the walls. Everything looked the same as it had the night before, except the plywood panel in the floor was gone. In its place was a gaping hole. She edged closer, peering into the darkness. The shaft dropped farther than she could see, the walls made of rough, wet earth. Somewhere below, that tapping sound started again, echoing up to her. Then came the voice. "You came back." Samantha's hands shook violently. "Where's my daughter?" she demanded. The voice was calm, almost gentle. "Safe. For now. What do you want from us?" The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the rain on the shed roof. Then the voice said, "It's not about what I want. It's about what the house owes." Samantha's stomach turned. "The house. It feeds me," the voice said. "Every few years. A gift from above to below." The words sank in like ice water. Her mind flashed with the muddy footprints, the strange way Chloe had spoken, the writing on the wall. "Why us?" she whispered. "You open the door," the voice replied simply. Something moved in the darkness below, slow, deliberate. She couldn't see it, but she felt the shift in the air, the faint vibration in the wood beneath her feet. Then a hand, long and pale, emerged from the shadows, gripping the edge of the hole. Samantha staggered back, nearly tripping over a rake. The hand was followed by another, both curling with unnatural strength into the wood. She turned and ran. Out of the shed, across the backyard, up the deck steps. She slid the glass door shut and locked it, her chest heaving. She turned toward the stairs and froze. Chloe was standing at the top, her stuffed rabbit hanging limp in her hand. Her head was tilted at the same unnatural angle, her smile slow and deliberate. "Mom," she said softly. "He's hungry." Samantha took one step toward her. "Sweetheart, come here, please." Chloe's eyes shifted toward the glass door. Samantha followed her gaze. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see a figure standing in the yard, just beyond the deck. Tall, unnaturally thin. Its head was too long, its arms stretching almost to the ground. It didn't move, but even through the glass, Samantha heard the whisper. Clear, cold, and certain. "It's your turn." For a few seconds, Samantha couldn't breathe. The rain distorted the glass between her and the figure, but it didn't blur the wrongness of its shape. The streetlight behind it cast its elongated shadow across the yard, stretching toward the deck like a reaching hand. "Chloe," Samantha said slowly, her voice trembling. "Come down here." Her daughter didn't move. She just stood there, eyes fixed on the figure outside. "He said you can end it now," Chloe murmured. "Or it'll be worse later." Samantha's mouth was dry. "End what?" Chloe blinked slowly, as if the question didn't make sense. "The hunger." The words landed heavy in Samantha's chest. Her mind raced. Was this some kind of nightmare? Sleep deprivation twisting her perception? But the cold in the pit of her stomach told her it was real. The figure outside tilted its head sharply, like a bird noticing something shiny. It took a step forward, and though it was still several yards away, Samantha swore she could feel the boards of the deck tremble faintly beneath her feet. She stumbled backward toward the kitchen counter, grabbing the first thing her hand touched, a large chef's knife from the drying rack. She raised it instinctively, though the absurdity of trying to fight something like that with a kitchen utensil wasn't lost on her. She turned back toward Chloe. "We're leaving. Now." But Chloe's expression hardened in a way Samantha had never seen before. "If we leave, he'll follow. You know that." Samantha's grip on the knife tightened. "We'll go to the police. To where the other doors are." Chloe's tone was disturbingly calm. "He knows all the places below." A noise like wood splitting rang from outside. Samantha whipped her head around. The figure was now at the base of the deck steps. It hadn't climbed them. It was just there, the rain streaming down its unnatural limbs. Its face was featureless except for a mouth, wide and fixed in what might have been a smile if it weren't so still. Then it spoke. "Bring her." Samantha's knees almost buckled. The voice wasn't loud, but it reverberated inside her skull, as though it had been whispered directly into her brain. "No," she said, her voice cracking. "You're not taking her." The figure tilted its head again, and something about the movement made Samantha's stomach twist. It was studying her, deciding something. Chloe's voice broke the moment. "Mom," she said softly, "please, if you don't, it'll come back hungry. It won't stop." Samantha felt the ground tilt beneath her. This was madness. She should grab Chloe, run for the car, drive until they were hours away from this place. But deep inside, some primal instinct whispered that the thing outside didn't care about locks or distance. Could find them. It would find them. The figure took one slow step onto the deck. The boards groaned under its weight. Samantha's body acted before her mind could. She lunged toward the sliding door and slammed it shut, only it was already shut. The figure hadn't opened it, hadn't broken it. It was just inside now. Her heart stuttered in her chest. The thing was standing in the middle of the kitchen, the rain still dripping from its elongated fingers onto the tile. The smell hit her first, earthy, metallic, and faintly sweet, like rotting flowers. Samantha raised the knife, her arm shaking violently. Stay away from her. The creature ignored her. His head turned slowly toward Chloe. Something in Samantha snapped. She charged forward, swinging the knife toward its midsection. The blade connected, if it could be called that, sinking into something that wasn't flesh but wasn't quite anything else, either. It was like cutting into wet clay. The figure didn't flinch. It simply looked down at the knife, then back at her, as if the gesture was mildly puzzling. Then it spoke again. You've opened the way. You can't close it. With a slow, deliberate movement, it wrapped one of its hands around the blade of the knife and pushed it out of itself, the steel coming free without resistance. Samantha stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet floor. Her gaze darted toward Chloe, but her daughter wasn't there anymore. "Chloe!" she screamed. From somewhere far below, too far for the size of the house, came her daughter's voice. "I'm here, Mom." It was faint, distorted, but unmistakably hers. Samantha's eyes flew to the kitchen floor. The tile beneath the table was buckling slightly, like something was pushing up from underneath. A crack split across it with a sharp snap, and the smell of damp soil poured into the air. The figure stepped back toward the hole that was opening in the floor, never taking its gaze from her. "Come down, or she stays." Samantha's pulse pounded in her ears. She wanted to scream at it, to demand it give Chloe back, but she knew that the only way to get her daughter was to follow. The crack widened, revealing a steep earthen tunnel leading into darkness. The sound of dripping water echoed up from below. The figure crouched at the edge of the hole, its limbs folding in ways that made Samantha's stomach turn. It dropped into the darkness without a sound. For a long moment, she just stood there, the rain hammering against the roof, her mind screaming at her to run. But Chloe's faint, frightened voice called again from below. "Please, Mom, hurry." Samantha tightened her grip on the knife, took a deep breath, and stepped toward the hole. The smell was stronger now, and the air was damp against her skin. She crouched, swung her legs over the edge, and began to lower herself down. The walls were slick, the earth cold against her palms. Her feet found no solid ground for what felt like far too long. Then finally she touched a surface. The tunnel was narrow, forcing her to hunch as she moved forward. The light from the kitchen faded behind her, replaced by an oppressive darkness that pressed in from all sides. Somewhere ahead, she heard the tapping again, slow and steady. This time it was joined by another sound, a low, wet breathing, just beyond the range of the tunnel's curve. Samantha moved forward, every step taking her deeper into the dark. The deeper Samantha went, the more the tunnel seemed to change. The earthen walls gave way to something harder, stone, cold and damp beneath her fingers. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if she were moving deeper into something that had been sealed for centuries. Her breathing was loud in the darkness, and every exhale seemed to bounce back at her, carrying faint echoes that didn't match her rhythm. She wasn't alone in here. She gripped the knife tighter, though the cold had already numbed her hands. Somewhere ahead, the tunnel widened, and a faint, flickering light began to break the blackness. It wasn't the warm light of a bulb or a torch, more like the strange, wavering glow of something alive. She slowed her steps, her bare feet sinking slightly into the damp earth. The low breathing she'd heard earlier was clearer now, rising and falling with an unnatural cadence. "Chloe?" she called softly, her voice trembling. The breathing stopped. A moment later, a small voice answered, closer than she expected. "Mom, I can't see you." Her heart surged. "I'm here, baby. Keep talking to me." She rounded the curve in the tunnel and froze. The space opened into a cavern, the ceiling lost in shadow. The walls glistened with moisture, and in the center was a shallow pool, its surface rippling faintly despite the stillness of the air. The flickering light came from within the water, glowing in eerie, pulsing green. Chloe stood at the far edge of the pool. She looked unharmed, but her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes reflected the green glow like glass. She was barefoot, her nightgown streaked with dirt and something darker. Between Samantha and her daughter stood the figure. But here, in the cavern's light, it looked different, worse. Its skin was the color of ash, stretched taut over a frame that was too tall, too thin. Its limbs seemed to have too many joints, bending in unnatural directions. Where its face should have been was only smooth, featureless skin. Except for the mouth. That terrible, unmoving mouth. It spoke without opening it. "You came down. Good." Samantha's voice was raw. "Let her go." The figure tilted its head, and for the first time it moved aside. Chloe's expression didn't change. She just watched her mother with those glassy, unblinking eyes. "She is not hurt," the voice said. "Not yet. But the hunger must be answered." Samantha's stomach nodded. "What does that mean?" The figure turned its head toward the pool. Slowly, something began to rise from its surface. At first, she thought it was another figure, taller, wider, but as it emerged, she realized it wasn't a person at all. It was a shape, a thing, vast and amorphous, its body shifting as though it were made of thick, glistening tar. Dozens of long, pale arms extended from it, each ending in a hand with black, curling nails. And in the center of its shifting form, a single lidless eye opened, large enough that Samantha could have stepped into it. It fixed on her, and her knees nearly buckled under the weight of its gaze. The voice came again, but now it seemed to echo from everywhere at once. "Every house has its foundation. This one is built on mine. The family before you understood. The one before them, too. The gift must be given." Samantha shook her head violently. "No, I'm not giving you my daughter." The figure between her and Chloe stepped closer, its limbs bending with fluid precision. "Then you will stay. You will take her place." The green light shimmered over the knife in her hand. Her thoughts raced. There was no way she could fight both of them. But maybe the thing wasn't expecting her to fight at all. She glanced at Chloe. "Baby, can you hear me? Really hear me?" For the first time since she'd entered the cavern, something flickered across her daughter's face. A tiny crease in her brow. "Mom!" The figure hissed without breath. Samantha lunged. Not at the tall figure, but at Chloe skirting the edge of the pool. The ground was slick, and she nearly lost her footing. But she reached her daughter's arm and yanked her close. The cavern roared. The tar-like mass in the pool surged upward, dozens of arms flailing, the single eye widening. The figure shrieked inside her skull, the sound enough to make her vision blur. "Run!" Samantha screamed, pulling Chloe toward the tunnel. The ground shook violently. One of the pale arms shot out from the pool, slamming into the cavern floor inches from them, spraying them with cold water. Another arm whipped toward Samantha's head, but she ducked, dragging Chloe behind her. They reached the tunnel mouth just as the tall figure appeared in front of them, its limbs blocking the way. Samantha didn't hesitate. She swung the knife upward, burying it deep into the figure's midsection. It let out a sound that was both a scream and a hiss, jerking back just enough for her to shove Chloe past it. "Go! Go!" she shouted. They scrambled into the tunnel, the roar from behind growing louder, more furious. The walls shook, dirt raining down on them as they clawed their way upward. Samantha could hear the tapping again, but now it was faster, frantic, echoing from behind them like a pursuit. Her lungs burned, her legs trembling as they climbed. The faint light from above grew brighter, until finally, they burst through the opening into the kitchen. The hole in the floor yawned behind them, and from its depths, A single pale hand reached up, nails scraping the tile. Samantha grabbed the heavy wooden table and shoved it across the hole. Then another chair. Then anything she could drag. The hand withdrew slowly, deliberately. For a moment there was silence. Then the voice came one last time, low and certain. "You've only delayed it." The smell of damp earth faded. The kitchen felt warmer. The tapping stopped. Samantha collapsed against the wall, Chloe clinging to her, shaking. Neither of them spoke for a long time. When Greg came home just before sunrise, he found them still there. The kitchen in disarray. Mud streaked across the floor. Samantha tried to tell him what happened, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Greg checked the shed. The padlock was in place. The floorboards were solid. No trapdoor. No sign of anything unusual. But that night, as Samantha lay awake with Chloe sleeping beside her, she heard it again. Faint, distant. Tap, 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 coming from far below. It had been a long winter, but the first warm weekend of April brought an unusual liveliness to the small coastal town of Dunwell. The sun shimmered across the bay, seagulls wheeled above the piers, and the air carried that briny scent that felt both nostalgic and fresh at once. For Alice Harmon, a newly retired schoolteacher who had moved into the historic Briarwood apartments just 6 months prior, it was the first time she felt like she truly belonged in the town. Briarwood was one of those old brick buildings you saw in postcards. Arched windows, ivy crawling along its south wall, and a carved stone date above the entryway that read 1891. Her third-floor apartment was modest but charming, with high ceilings, creaky floorboards, and a balcony that overlooked the bustling street below. For years, it had been an inn later converted into apartments. Locals often told Alice how lucky she was to have gotten a unit there. Briarwood was always in demand. The building had its quirks, of course. Every few nights, Alice heard faint knocks or muffled thuds in the walls, which she chalked up to old pipes or a neighbor closing a cabinet. She'd also noticed that one corner of her bedroom had a strange draft, as if there was a small gap in the wall behind the baseboard heater. Harmless stuff, she told herself, part of the charm. That Saturday, while reorganizing her living room bookshelf, Alice accidentally dropped a thick hardcover that thudded heavily onto the floor. When she bent down to retrieve it, she noticed that one of the floorboards beneath the rug sat slightly higher than the others. At first, she thought it was just warped wood, but when she pressed on it, it shifted ever so slightly with a hollow sound. Curiosity piqued. Alice fetched a flathead screwdriver from her kitchen drawer and pried gently at the board's edge. It came loose with surprising ease, revealing a dark gap beneath. She expected to see nothing more than dust and the subfloor, but instead, there was a space, a narrow cavity stretching deeper than her eyes could follow. She hesitated. Rationally, it was probably just an unused maintenance crawlspace or part of the old building's construction. But the gap was oddly uniform, like a deliberately made compartment. She slid her phone over the edge, flashlight on, and snapped a photo. The picture revealed a small ladder leading down into the darkness. Her heart thumped a little faster. Alice considered leaving it alone. She could just put the board back, pretend she never saw it. But her curiosity, the same trait that had made her an enthusiastic history teacher for decades, wouldn't let her. She retrieved a small flashlight from the kitchen cabinet, set it on her wrist strap, and carefully lowered herself through the gap. The wood around the edges felt strangely cold, the air inside stale but faintly metallic. The ladder descended about 8 feet before ending on a narrow concrete floor. She found herself in a corridor no more than 3 feet wide, running parallel to her apartment. The walls were bare stone, damp in places, and the ceiling was low enough that she had to hunch slightly. The corridor stretched in both directions, vanishing into shadows. To her right, she thought she heard the faint hum of electrical wiring. To her left, the air felt cooler, carrying a faint but unmistakable smell. A mix of mold and something sharper, something almost like rust. Against her better judgment, she turned left. Her footsteps echoed faintly as she walked, the sound bouncing in strange ways off the stone. The passage took 2 right turns, each narrower than the last, until she came to a wooden door. It wasn't much taller than her chest, painted an old, peeling green. The door frame had been sealed with what looked like multiple layers of caulking and paint over the decades. There was no handle, just a metal latch. Alice pressed on the latch. It gave with a creak that sounded far too loud in the enclosed space. The door swung inward to reveal a room. It was no larger than a walk-in closet, lit by a single hanging bulb that was long dead. Dust lay thick on the floor, disturbed only by what looked like faint tracks, footprints, perhaps, though the shapes were indistinct. Against the back wall stood a small table with several objects arranged neatly on top. A stack of yellowed photographs, all face down. A glass jar, sealed with wax, containing what looked like hair, black, coarse and tangled. A child's shoe, scuffed and missing its laces. A leather-bound notebook, cracked with age. Alice's breath caught. The air in the room felt heavier here, the smell of rust stronger. No, not rust. Blood. Old blood. She stepped forward and turned over the first photograph. Her heart froze. It was an image of a young woman, maybe in her 20s, sitting in what looked like an armchair. Her eyes were closed, her head tilted slightly to the side. At first, Alice thought she was sleeping, until she saw the rope tied around the woman's wrists and the dark stain on her blouse. Alice set the photograph down with trembling hands and flipped over another. This one showed a man, middle-aged, slumped against a wall, a smear of something dark trailing from his mouth. The rest of the photographs were similar, all different people, all clearly dead, each in a different location that Alice couldn't place. She backed away from the table, her flashlight beam shaking slightly. That was when she noticed something she hadn't before. The faint sound of breathing. Not hers. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere behind her. Alice spun around, her beam cutting through the narrow corridor beyond the doorway. Empty. She told herself she must be imagining it, the sound amplified by the claustrophobic space. Still, every nerve in her body screamed at her to get out. She reached for the notebook on the table, a part of her desperate to understand what she had found, and shoved it into her jacket pocket. Then she turned to leave. She made it 2 steps before the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. Alice's flashlight flickered violently, the beam spasming across the walls. She grabbed the latch, yanking hard, but it wouldn't budge. The breathing was louder now. Closer. She froze, the beam of her flashlight landing on the far corner of the room, where a shadow seemed to shift against the wall, slowly unfolding into something vaguely human-shaped. Her throat tightened. The thing, whatever it was, stepped forward, just enough for the light to graze the edges of a face. But there was no face, only a pale, featureless expanse of skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. The air seemed to grow thinner. Alice stumbled backward, her legs hitting the table, sending the jar of hair rolling to the floor with a dull clink. The featureless figure tilted its head, as if studying her. Then, without a sound, it began moving toward her. Alice's breath hitched in her throat as the shadowy figure moved closer. Its gait was smooth but unnaturally precise, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. The lack of features on its face made her skin crawl. No eyes to read, no mouth to plead with, just a pale, vacant void. Desperation surged. She yanked at the door latch again, but it refused to budge. Panic rose as the thing's silent approach filled the tiny space, its presence squeezing the air from her lungs. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling. "Leave me alone." No response. Her flashlight flickered violently, casting long, jagged shadows that danced across the walls. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of rust and earth, and something deeper, something like despair. Alice's gaze darted to the notebook in her pocket. Maybe the answers to this nightmare were inside. She fumbled with the clasp, pulling it free. The leather cover was brittle, the pages yellowed and brittle, but the ink was still legible. The first entry was dated almost a century ago, penned in neat, looping handwriting, April 3rd, 1927. It has been 2 weeks since the disappearance of Mary Ellis. The police search continues, but I fear what lurks beneath these walls is more sinister than anyone imagines. The tenants whisper of strange noises, shadows that move on their own, and a smell of decay that no one can explain. I've begun to investigate the old tunnels and found a locked door near my apartment. Tonight, I dared to peer inside. Alice swallowed hard. This wasn't the first person to uncover the secret. But who was the writer? She flipped forward. The next entries were more frantic, less coherent, filled with sketches of strange figures, featureless shapes, wide eyes in dark pools, and corridors that twisted impossibly. One passage made her skin crawl. The thing watches. It waits. I hear it breathing in the walls, whispering names in the night. If I am found dead, know it was not by my own hand. It has a hunger that never ceases. Suddenly, the room temperature plummeted. Alice's breath fogged in the cold air. The breathing she had heard grew louder, raspier, closer. She swung the flashlight toward the corner, where the shadow had grown darker, denser. Her heart thundered in her ears. A whisper broke through the silence. "Why are you here?" Alice's voice barely a whisper. I want to know the truth." The shadow seemed to recoil, folding in on itself briefly before expanding outward like a dark wave. It moved toward the table, fingers brushing the scattered photographs and the glass jar filled with coarse black hair. The jar rattled as it was lifted and examined, then placed back gently. A moment passed. Then the shadow's presence shifted, less menacing now, almost sorrowful. The breathing slowed. Alice swallowed the lump in her throat. "Who are you?" The whisper came again, softer this time. "A keeper, a witness, bound to the house by what has been taken." Alice's mind reeled. What has been taken? The shadow gestured toward the photographs on the table. She picked up another photo, this one depicting a young girl standing in the street, her expression blank, her eyes unfocused. The caption, handwritten on the back, read, "Evelyn, 1925. The whisper continued, "The house has a price. For every soul it shelters, it demands another in return." Alice felt a cold sweat break out across her skin. "How many?" The shadow folded slightly, as if weighed down by the question. "Too many. More than can be counted." A sudden noise startled Alice, the sound of footsteps echoing faintly down the corridor outside the small room. Someone else was here. She snapped her head toward the door, the shadow vanishing into the darkest corner. "Stay calm," Alice whispered to herself, gripping the notebook tightly. She moved to the door and pressed her ear against it. Voices, low, muffled, indistinct, but unmistakable. A key rattled in a lock. The door handle turned slowly. Alice's pulse surged. She backed away from the door as it creaked open to reveal a tall man in a dark coat, his face unreadable in the dim corridor light. "Ms. Harmon?" he asked quietly. "I've been looking for you. You shouldn't be down here." The man's eyes flickered with something Alice couldn't immediately place. Concern? Maybe, or weariness. He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him, shutting out the faint sound of distant footsteps in the hall above. The air grew heavier, charged with an unspoken warning. "You shouldn't be down here," he repeated, voice low and firm. "This place isn't just old plumbing or forgotten storage. It's something else." Alice swallowed hard. "I found the door beneath my floorboard, and then the room with those things." She nodded toward the table, still littered with photographs and the glass jar. He sighed and ran a hand through thinning hair. "I'm Jonah Marks. I've lived in Briarwood for nearly 20 years. There are things about this building most tenants don't know, and for good reason." Jonah pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and trained its beam on the far wall, where a narrow passage extended deeper into the darkness. Years ago, the building was constructed on land that once held an old burial ground, long forgotten by the city. They say the original owners tried to cover it up, to keep the truth hidden. But the dead never stay buried forever. Alice shivered. The air felt suddenly colder, and the whispering breath she'd heard before seemed to stir around them. "What do you mean, the dead?" she asked. Jonah's face grew grim. "Not just dead. Trapped. Bound by the building itself. Something in the earth below feeds on their souls. Keeps them tethered here. People who disappear. Strange noises. That stench of decay you smelled. It's all connected." Alice glanced at the photographs again. "So those people, they're victims? More than victims. They're prisoners." Jonah's flashlight flickered and he shook it, muttering under his breath. "What about that thing?" Alice asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The shadow I saw, the face without features." Jonah nodded slowly. "That's the keeper. It watches over the dead and the living alike, ensuring the balance is maintained. It's not evil in the way we think. More like an ancient custodian with a terrible burden." Alice's heart pounded. "Why show yourself to me now?" "Because," Jonah said, voice dropping, "you've already disturbed the order by opening that door, and that means the balance is breaking. The building's hunger is growing." A distant rumble echoed faintly through the tunnel, like shifting earth or distant thunder. "We don't have much time," Jonah continued. "You have to help me find the others who've vanished, to uncover the truth and put things right before the hunger consumes more." Alice nodded, determination flooding through her fear. "Where do we start?" Jonah flicked the beam of his flashlight toward a rusted metal door at the corridor's end. "There's a map in the maintenance room. It shows tunnels beneath Briarwood that no tenant has seen. But beware, those passages hold more than just shadows." Together, they moved down the corridor, deeper into the unknown, the walls closing in as the light from the surface faded behind them. The whispers grew louder, soft voices pleading, warning, begging for release. As they reached the maintenance room, Jonah pulled out a rusted keyring and unlocked the heavy door. Inside, under layers of dust and cobwebs, was a large, yellowed blueprint of the building and its underground passages. Alice studied the map carefully. It marked old tunnels, sealed chambers, and cryptic notes scrawled in faded ink. "One of these tunnels leads to the original burial crypt," Jonah said. "If we can get there, we might find a way to end this." Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The air grew colder still, and the whispered voices swelled into urgent chants. Alice felt a cold hand brush her shoulder, and she spun around, but there was nothing there. Jonah's voice broke through the growing cacophony. "Stay close. This building is alive in ways you can't imagine." With only their flashlights piercing the blackness, they prepared to venture deeper, unaware that unseen eyes watched their every move, and the true horror of Briarwood was only just beginning to reveal itself. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides as Alice and Jonah stepped into the narrow tunnel beyond the maintenance room. The air was damp and heavy, the faint drip of water echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. Their flashlight beams carved twin paths through the gloom, illuminating rough stone walls and tangled roots that clawed through cracks in the ceiling. Jonah paused, placing a hand on the wall. This section wasn't part of the original design. It's older, part of what they built over. Alice shivered, her breath visible in the cold air. The faint chanting had faded, replaced by a low, pulsing vibration that thrummed through the ground beneath their feet. As they moved deeper, the tunnel opened into a vaulted chamber, vast and shadowed, with walls etched in ancient symbols, circles, lines, and shapes that made Alice's skin crawl despite her efforts to focus. Jonah pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket, flipping to a page filled with sketches matching the carvings. "These are warnings," he said, "from the builders. They knew something terrible was buried here. They tried to keep it contained. The chamber floor was cracked, with a pit in the center covered by a rusted iron grate. From below came a faint, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. Alice's gaze locked on the pit. Is that what's feeding the hunger? Jonah nodded grimly. It's the source of the darkness, the original crypt, the heart of what binds the restless spirits here. Suddenly, the grate shuddered violently, as if something beneath was trying to break free. Dust and small stones rained down as the tunnel seemed to pulse with growing energy. We need to find the others, Jonah said urgently. Those who vanished here might be trapped in pockets beneath the building, caught between worlds. Alice swallowed her fear and nodded. How do we reach them? Jonah led her to a side passage hidden behind a loose stone slab. As he pushed it aside, a steep, narrow staircase spiraled downward into blackness. They descended carefully, the air growing colder with every step. Whispered voices floated faintly, some sorrowful, others pleading. Alice's heart ached with the weight of unseen suffering. At the bottom, they found a labyrinth of tunnels, some flooded with icy water, others choked with debris. Along the walls, strange markings glowed faintly, a soft, phosphorescent light that pulsed with a rhythm that matched the thumping below. They followed the markings, which led them to a chamber where a pale figure lay huddled in the corner. It was a young woman, eyes wide with terror, her skin nearly translucent. Alice, Jonah whispered. She's one of the lost. Alice stepped forward cautiously. Can you hear me? We're here to help. The woman's lips trembled. The hunger, it won't stop. It's coming. Before Alice could respond, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A deep, guttural growl echoed from the tunnels, reverberating through the stone walls. Jonah pulled her back. We need to get out now. They hurried back through the maze of tunnels, the whispers turning into frantic screams. Behind them, shadows coalesced, dark, writhing shapes that seemed to reach out with clawed hands, eager to drag them into the abyss. As they climbed the staircase back toward the chamber, the iron grate shook violently. A terrifying, guttural roar filled the air as something massive slammed against the barrier beneath them. Alice's flashlight flickered wildly, then died. Plunged into complete darkness, she could only hear the pounding heartbeat below and the frantic beat of her own. Jonah's voice broke the silence, steady and calm. Hold my hand. We're almost free. With trembling hands, Alice grasped his. Together, they pushed upward, the weight of the darkness pressing down but their will unbroken. At last, they burst into the chamber above, gasping for breath as the grate clanged shut behind them. The thumping slowed, the shadows retreated. But the ancient hunger was not sated, it was only biding its time. Jonah looked at Alice, eyes dark with resolve. This is just the beginning. We have to finish what was started here, or the darkness will consume everything. Alice nodded, her fear replaced by fierce determination. The hidden terrors beneath Briarwood were real, and they had to be stopped before the hunger claimed more innocent lives. The heavy iron grate stood sealed behind them, but Alice could still feel the pulsing energy beneath her feet, a heartbeat echoing from the depths of Briarwood's ancient crypt. The chamber was silent now, the faint glow of the phosphorescent markings fading to a dull gleam. Jonah leaned against the wall, breathing hard. We've barely scratched the surface of what's trapped here. The building is a cage, but also a warning. Alice wiped the cold sweat from her brow. How do we end this? How do we stop the hunger? He looked at her, eyes shadowed but resolute. There's a ritual recorded in the notebook you found. It was written by the first tenants who discovered the truth. A way to sever the bond and free the souls trapped here. Alice nodded, pulling the battered leather journal from her coat. The last pages were worn and faded but contained detailed instructions in that same neat handwriting. The ritual required a circle of iron dust, salt, and the ashes of a fire fueled by ancient wood. the kind only found in old forests far from the city's reach. It was to be performed at midnight, in the heart of the crypt, while reciting a series of invocations to call and release the trapped spirits. Jonah frowned. "We'll need to prepare. We have little time." Together, they gathered what they could from the maintenance room. Salt, a small iron rod Jonah had carried for years, and flint stones to start the fire. Outside, the town had gone quiet, the first stars twinkling coldly above. Back in the crypt, the air was thick with anticipation. Alice arranged the iron dust in a perfect circle on the cracked stone floor. Jonah set the firewood in the center, and with flint and patience, a small flame flickered to life. As midnight approached, they began the chanting, the ancient words trembling on their tongues in the dim light. The walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with their voices, the heartbeat from below growing louder. Suddenly, the shadows gathered, swirling into a massive, indistinct form that towered above them, the source of the hunger. It hissed, a sound like grinding stone and dying breaths, reaching out with limbs of smoke and darkness. Alice's voice faltered, but Jonah's strengthened, steadying her as they continued the invocation. The fire blazed higher, the iron circle glowing red-hot, and the ashes stirred, rising like smoke. With a final, resounding verse, the shadow screamed, a terrible, anguished cry that shook the very stones. The pulsing heartbeat slowed, then ceased. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a cool, serene silence. In the quiet, Alice felt a presence brush past her, a gentle warmth, like a whisper of thanks. The trapped souls were free. Exhausted but triumphant, they ascended the stairs back to the surface. The building, once heavy with dread, seemed lighter, as if a dark shroud had been lifted. Outside, dawn was breaking over Dunwell, bathing the town in soft golden light. Alice took a deep breath, feeling hope bloom where fear had once ruled. Jonah smiled faintly. "Briarwood has rest now." Alice nodded, the notebook tucked safely in her coat. She knew the building's scars would never fully heal, but its terrible secret was finally laid to rest. As they parted ways, a final breeze swept through the street, carrying with it the faintest echo of whispered gratitude. A promise that even in the darkest places, light could still find a way. The old playground at Maplewood Park was supposed to be safe, a place where children's laughter echoed beneath tall oaks and summer breezes danced through swings and slides. For years, families had gathered there for picnics and weekend fun. The cracked paint on the merry-go-round and the faded wooden benches were signs of time, but no one ever thought the place harbored a secret darker than peeling bark or rusting bolts. Emma Caldwell had moved back to her hometown after a decade away, drawn by the promise of quiet and the nostalgia of simpler days. As a local journalist, she was always searching for stories beneath the surface, but nothing had prepared her for what she would find beneath Maplewood's cheerful exterior. It started with a tip from a retired groundskeeper who claimed the playground sandbox had been disturbed late at night. Emma had laughed it off as a prank or maybe stray animals digging for shelter. But curiosity nudged her to visit the park one chilly autumn evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty playground. Leaves rustled as a cold wind swept through the trees. Emma's footsteps crunched on the gravel path as she made her way toward the sandbox. She knelt beside the wooden frame, brushing aside the cool sand. It was uneven, as if something had been buried or unearthed recently. She dug cautiously with her hands, fingers probing the gritty grains until they hit something hard. A small metal box, rusted and locked tight. Emma's pulse quickened. With no tools at hand, she wrapped the box in her jacket and took it home, eager to see what secrets it held. Back in her modest apartment, she retrieved a crowbar from the kitchen drawer. The box gave way with a reluctant creak. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a bundle of old letters, yellowed photographs, and a small journal bound in cracked leather. The letters were addressed to a Margaret, dated from the 1940s, filled with desperate pleas and cryptic warnings about the shadow beneath the playground and a curse that consumes. The journal belonged to someone named Thomas, who described his work as a local handyman and caretaker. His entries grew darker with each page, mentioning strange noises, missing children, and a figure he called the Watcher, seen only in fleeting glimpses. Emma's fingers trembled as she read one passage. October 17, 1943. The children are frightened. They speak of a man with no face, who waits in the shadows. Last night, I found a small girl's shoe near the old oak tree, but she was nowhere to be found. The town looks the other way, but I fear the darkness is closer than we know. A chill ran down Emma's spine. She glanced out her window, the city lights twinkling against the night sky, but the playground was distant, hidden behind blocks of buildings and fenced yards. Her phone buzzed, a message from her editor reminding her of a deadline, but Emma barely noticed. Her mind was consumed by the box, the letters, and the unseen terror lurking beneath Maplewood Park. That night, as the city quieted, Emma dreamed of faceless figures and whispered warnings carried on the wind. She woke gasping, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down. She knew she couldn't ignore the past any longer. The playground wasn't just a place for children to play. It was a trap. The morning sun filtered weakly through Emma's curtains, casting pale light on the scattered papers from the metal box. The letters and journal lay open across her small dining table, the words etched deep into her mind. The shadows of the past seemed to cling to her apartment like a thick fog. Emma knew she had to return to Maplewood Park. She needed answers. Who was this Watcher? What had happened to the children Thomas mentioned? And why had no one ever spoken about it openly? She packed a small bag with essentials: camera, flashlight, gloves, and headed out, the crisp autumn air bracing against her skin. The park was quiet, a stark contrast to the vivid stories she'd uncovered. The playground sat nestled beneath the towering oaks, the swings swaying gently in the breeze, creaking softly. Emma's footsteps echoed on the gravel as she approached the sandbox. The wooden frame looked weathered but intact. She knelt, running her fingers along the edge, half expecting the ground to shift beneath her touch. Her gaze drifted to the large oak tree Thomas had mentioned in his journal. Its twisted branches spread wide, casting intricate shadows over the ground. At its base lay a scattering of leaves, and something else, a small, worn shoe. Emma's breath caught. She recognized it instantly from the photographs in the box. A child's shoe, scuffed and old, as if lost decades ago. She carefully bagged the shoe, her mind racing. Who had left it here? Had the child returned in some way? Or was it a grim reminder of a tragedy long buried? Emma's camera clicked as she documented the scene. Every detail mattered. Suddenly, a faint sound pulled her attention. The soft rustle of footsteps behind the bushes lining the park. She turned quickly, heart pounding. No one. Only the whispering wind through the leaves. She stepped back toward the sandbox, but the hairs on the back of her neck prickled. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if unseen eyes watched her every move. She pulled the leather-bound journal from her bag, flipping to a page where Thomas wrote about strange lights seen flickering beneath the playground at night. Emma resolved to return after dark, to explore the park when the shadows grew long and the secrets whispered loudest. As evening fell, the city lights blinked on, and Emma slipped quietly through the gates of Maplewood Park. The playground was deserted, bathed in the eerie glow of street lamps casting long, distorted shadows. She set up her camera, pointed toward the sandbox and the oak tree, and waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The cool night air grew heavy with silence. Then, just as she began to doubt, movement flickered at the edge of her vision. A dark figure darted between the trees, too swift, too silent. Emma's heart thundered as she grabbed her flashlight, sweeping its beam across the underbrush. Nothing. The shadow had vanished. A low, almost inaudible whisper drifted on the wind. A voice half heard but impossible to place. Emma's skin crawled. She shivered, but her curiosity outweighed her fear. She moved toward the sandbox, where the ground looked freshly disturbed. Kneeling, she brushed away loose sand and uncovered a small, rusted metal latch embedded in the ground. Her pulse quickened. Had she just found an entrance? The latch was cold and stubborn but gave way under her persistent fingers, revealing a narrow hatch leading down into darkness. Emma hesitated only a moment before gripping her flashlight tighter and beginning the slow descent into the unknown. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic and sharp. As she reached the bottom, her light illuminated a cramped, low-ceilinged tunnel, walls slick with moisture and lined with old wooden beams that creaked ominously. Somewhere deep below, the distant sound of children laughing echoed, a sound both joyful and haunting, as if carried from another time. Emma's breath caught. She pressed onward, every step taking her further from safety and closer to the heart of Maplewood's dark secret. The tunnel's damp walls closed in as Emma moved deeper into the earth beneath Maplewood Park. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rough-hewn wooden supports groaning under the weight of the soil above. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and old decay, and every footstep echoed with a hollow clang that made her heart race. Somewhere beyond the beam's reach, the faint sound of children's laughter drifted in and out, an eerie, disembodied chorus that sent a chill racing down Emma's spine. It was as if the ghosts of the past were calling to her, beckoning her further. She paused, the silence pressing on her. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw them, small footprints pressed faintly into the dust, trailing deeper into the labyrinthine passages. The prints were too small to be from an adult and fresh enough to suggest recent presence. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't alone down here. Emma followed the footprints, careful not to disturb the fragile dust, weaving through a maze of narrow tunnels. Along the walls were crude markings, scratches, tally marks, and symbols that twisted in patterns she couldn't decipher. It felt as if the very stone had been marked by those who'd been trapped here long ago, desperate to be remembered. After what felt like hours, the passage opened into a vast cavern, lit dimly by flickering electric bulbs dangling from corroded wires. The walls were lined with strange relics, discarded toys, broken tricycles, rusted bicycles missing their wheels. A makeshift altar stood at the center, adorned with photographs of missing children, faded letters, and a small pile of weathered shoes, each one telling a silent story of loss. Emma's breath caught as she recognized a face in one of the photos. A little girl, her eyes wide and hopeful, smiling despite the grainy black and white image. It was the same child whose shoe she'd found at the oak tree. Suddenly, a whisper slid through the cavern air, almost indistinguishable from the creaking wires overhead. "Help us?" Emma spun around, her flashlight catching movement near a darkened alcove. A faint glow pulsed there, rhythmic and beckoning. She stepped closer, drawn by equal parts fear and resolve. In the alcove, she found an old wooden door, worn by time but surprisingly intact. It bore strange carvings, symbols similar to those scratched into the tunnel walls, and a heavy iron lock. Emma's hands trembled as she examined the lock. It was cold to the touch, and an uneasy sensation crawled over her skin, as if the door itself were alive and watching. She pulled the journal from her bag and flipped to a passage Thomas had written. "The door guards the deepest secret. Beyond it lies the heart of the Watcher's domain, a place where shadows breathe and time forgets. Only those who carry the key may enter. But beware, for some secrets are meant to remain buried." Emma's eyes darted over the last sentence. The key! She rifled through the box's contents, pulling out a tarnished, ornate key she hadn't noticed before. Its metal was dark and heavy, cold against her palm. Taking a deep breath, she fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a reluctant creak, releasing the door. A wave of cold air burst forth, carrying a scent of earth and something darker, something ancient and terrible. The door swung open to reveal a spiraling staircase, descending deeper still into the bowels of the earth. Emma's flashlight caught glimpses of carved faces and twisted figures etched into the stone walls, tormented expressions frozen in eternal agony. The laughter she'd heard earlier now seemed to echo all around, layered with cries of fear and sorrow. With a pounding heart, Emma stepped onto the staircase, the weight of the past pressing down on her as she ventured toward the Watcher's lair, unaware that something was watching her from the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. The spiral staircase seemed endless as Emma descended, each step echoing in the hollow silence of the underground chamber. The air grew colder and heavier with every turn, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Her flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the stone walls etched with grotesque carvings. Faces twisted in fear and agony, mouths agape in silent screams. Emma swallowed hard, gripping the leather-bound journal tightly. The ancient key in her pocket felt like a lifeline, cold and unyielding. Her mind raced, recalling the passages Thomas had written about the Watcher, a being neither living nor dead, bound to the earth beneath the park, feeding on fear and sorrow. At the bottom of the staircase, a heavy iron door barred her way. It was scarred and rusted but bore the same strange symbols she'd seen before. Taking a deep breath, Emma pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Beyond the door lay a cavernous room lit by an eerie, unnatural glow emanating from cracks in the walls and ceiling. The ground was uneven, covered in dirt and broken toys, the remnants of lost childhood strewn across the floor. At the center stood the Watcher. The figure was humanoid but malformed, its body cloaked in shadows that seemed to writhe and shift, twisting into unnatural shapes. Its face was a void, featureless except for two hollow sockets that pulsed with a dim, malevolent light. It radiated a cold so intense that Emma's breath came in ragged gasps. The Watcher moved silently, gliding forward with impossible grace. Its presence filled the chamber, pressing on Emma's mind with a tide of despair and fear. "You shouldn't be here," a voice echoed in her mind, cold, ancient, and full of sorrow. "This place is not for the living." Emma steadied herself. "Why do you haunt this place? What happened to the children?" The Watcher's shadowy form writhed, and images flickered in the glowing pits of its eyes. Children laughing, playing, then disappearing into darkness. Anguished faces pleading for help. A town that turned away, blinded by fear and denial. "I am bound to guard what lies beneath," the voice whispered. "I am the keeper of the forgotten, the watcher of those lost between worlds." Emma's heart ached. "But it's your hunger that traps them here, isn't it? The fear, the sorrow, they feed it." The Watcher's form shimmered, and a wave of cold despair washed over her. "I do not choose this fate. I am cursed to bear their pain, to contain the darkness so it does not spread." Emma's mind raced, piecing together the journal's final entry. The ritual meant to break the curse, to release the Watcher and the children trapped in eternal limbo. She stepped forward, pulling the journal from her bag and reciting the incantation written on its last page. Her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. The chamber responded. The glowing cracks brightened, casting fierce light that chased away the shadows. The Watcher writhed and howled, a sound like wind through dead trees, the agony of centuries pouring forth. Emma continued, pouring her will into the ritual, the words binding the ancient curse, severing the ties that bound the Watcher to this place. As the final syllable left her lips, a blinding light engulfed the chamber. Emma shielded her eyes, feeling a rush of warmth and peace wash over her. When the light faded, the Watcher was gone. In its place was a small, shimmering orb of light, like a soul finally freed. The cavern felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. Emma looked around to find the scattered toys and photographs now glowing softly, as if bathed in healing light. She felt a presence beside her, gentle, grateful. The laughter of children filled the air, pure and joyful for the first time in decades. Emma knew the nightmare beneath Maplewood Park was finally over. She climbed the staircase back to the surface, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. The playground looked peaceful, bathed in golden light, the laughter of children now real, echoing free. Emma smiled, heart full, knowing that sometimes, even the darkest secrets can be faced and overcome. The sun was fully risen now, casting warm light over the freshly fallen leaves scattered beneath the oaks at Maplewood Park. The playground, once a place burdened by whispered fears and shadows, seemed renewed, alive again with the laughter of children and the gentle hum of a peaceful afternoon. Emma sat on a worn wooden bench, the leather-bound journal resting on her lap. She traced her fingers over the faded inscription inside the cover, a quiet reminder of the past she'd uncovered, and the darkness she'd faced and helped dispel. Her mind replayed the events of the last several days. The discovery of the metal box buried beneath the sandbox, the cryptic letters and journal entries revealing the Watcher's torment, the descent into the Earth's cold belly, and the final confrontation with the shadowed entity bound to the playground. It had been a journey through fear and sorrow, but also one of courage, truth, and ultimately, redemption. As families gathered around, children ran between swings and slides, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the chilling history buried beneath their feet. Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude, that the victims of the past had finally found peace. Her phone buzzed quietly in her bag. It was a message from her editor. "Great work on the Maplewood story. Everyone needs to hear this." Emma smiled softly. This was more than a story, it was a reckoning. Yet even as the light filled the park, she couldn't help but glance toward the ancient oak tree, its twisted branches reaching skyward like silent sentinels. Somewhere deep within its roots, the earth held secrets that might never be fully understood. But for now, the curse was broken. The Watcher's burden lifted. The children were free. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it the faintest whisper, a soft, thankful sigh that vanished as quickly as it came. Emma stood, brushing off her coat. There was still much work to be done, more shadows to face in other places deemed safe. But for now, Maplewood Park was a place of healing, a testament to the resilience of memory and the power of facing darkness with light. As she walked away, the laughter of children followed her, a living promise that even the scariest discoveries could lead to hope and renewal. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed unraveling the dark secrets of Maplewood Park with me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest places are the ones we think we know best. See you next time.